Jumping into the module here for the hierarchy assignment in the hierarchy module, you'll find everything you need. So again, if you haven't already done the readings for this week, make sure to read chapter 5 out of the design school layout, the layout characteristics. And then below that down here, you'll find the assignment sheet, as well as the link to those fonts that I provided you, which you can certainly select from, but you don't have to. And then the previous examples are down here as well. We looked at the assignment sheet a little bit last week, but let's just review that quickly to make sure that we have a clear understanding. Essentially what we're doing is we are translating a top 10 list that you guys find. So you're going to be researching a top 10 list. And from the content of that top 10 list, you're going to be using it for this exercise. So you're going to be pulling the text directly from that top 10 list and using that for this exercise. That being said, when you're looking for a top 10 list, keep that in mind. You don't want to find something that has too much text in it. Something that is going to be short and concise, but have a few different elements that you'll be able to use for obviously, a title, a subheader, and some sort of body copy for each one of those topics. So every item on the list needs to have at least a short body copy attached to it, some sort of description of what that topic is on the list. But again, take that into account when you're looking for these, the length of each one of those, and is that going to work for this particular project? The theme can be whatever you want. If you want to relate it to music, if you want to relate it to art, design, something you're interested in, it's up to you what you want it to be. But go ahead and start conducting that research if you haven't already. Find that content and you'll pull that information right for the assignment. Remember, you're going to use one typeface for this, but within that type family, you can use any of the fonts that typeface includes. So for example, if you're referencing the typefaces that I referred to there, and you want to use the new Grotesque, that typeface itself has several different fonts. It has 22 different fonts inside of it, and you can use any of these for the entirety of this project. Okay. You're going to be using 11 by 17 format for this. So it's up to you whether you want it to be horizontal or vertical. Last week we looked at a vertical layout, actually. We kind of got that started. We were working with 2 different columns. You could certainly go with a route like that. Today we'll actually look at a horizontal format just to change it up a little bit. It's up to you how you want to do that, but make sure that you're sticking to that 11 by 17 size. That's what we refer to as a tabloid size document. And then thinking about what this practice is really about, the hierarchy. How are you going to establish that hierarchy? There's probably things that we'll be able to analyze here that we'll be able to correct further as far as text formatting goes and things like that. But for right now, what I really want you to focus on is creating some sort of structure, information that is clearly organized within some sort of grids or guidelines within your piece, and a clear structure of a headline, a subheader, and some sort of body copy. You can have additional levels of hierarchy within that as well if you have that within your content, but make sure you at least have those 3 of the overall title of the top 10 list, the subheader of what that topic is, and some short body copy description of that topic. You're going to explore things like the placement of the page, the grid structure, and the guides, and the overall alignment of those items, the scale and the weight of the elements of typography, and the spacing and the type styles. So things like the leading and the tracking and the different type styles within the type families. How can you play with all of those to create differences within the space? Remember, this is only grayscale. We'll call it grayscale, not necessarily black and white. You can use variations of gray within there, but no color and no imagery. Try to avoid widows and orphans. Those are going to be words that sit by themselves on a line. That's considered a widow. And orphans are going to be sentences or loan words that would appear at the top of a page or column that's attached to the previous body copy. Try to avoid those, but again, I'm not going to be too crazy about those this round. We'll be diving into that a little further as we continue on in our layout and compositions. So that's where you can find all the information. Refer to this as you guys are getting going, certainly for your things to explore and stuff like that. And then of course, we talked about the fonts that are available if you would like to use those, and the previous examples down here too that you guys can refer to. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Any questions right now before we get started on the actual assignment itself? You guys want to jump on over? Okay. Well, for the sake of this practice, I found a top 10 list, top 10 beaches in California. And I thought I'd use this for the practice. It has 10 beaches, obviously. We have a title to the piece, top 10 beaches in California. It lists them out here, La Jolla Shores Beach, and then it has a short description about that. So it has all the content I need. I really don't need anything more than this. I can add in numerals if I want to. But essentially that is the information I need. If you do have more information, let's say you have Coronado Beach and it gives some sort of key information about that specific location or something like that. You could certainly incorporate that within your hierarchy, right? That would be a sort of another level of your hierarchy. But essentially for this project, this is all I need is some sort of title to the overall list, some sort of topic subheader, and then some body copy that I'm going to be able to use for each one of these topics. And from this information, I can literally copy and paste this into my own design. Okay. So I actually worked on an example of this and how we could potentially use this. And I thought it'd be worthwhile kind of recreating this and going over a few details as well. So you can see I essentially took all that information. Instead of using a vertical layout, which we were doing in last week's class and using 2 different columns, I'm using 5 different columns, and I'm actually using multiple rows inside here as well to create more of a modular grid for myself to use. And you can see, without even being able to necessarily see the grid, there's a structure going on here, right? All of the different topics up at the top are aligned to that same line. I'm using one single typeface here, but I'm using variations of that typeface to sort of break up the space. The body copy itself is very legible, even when it's at this smaller size. It's fitting within all of my text boxes that I have, and I'm essentially able to create some sort of clear hierarchy within the space, some clear organization of information to bring the subject in through the title, and then move into the subheaders and the body copy related to each one of these topics. So how can we create something like this ourselves? Before I do that, let's look at the actual grid that we are using here. When I do show the grid, you can see that I'm essentially using a modular grid here and utilizing different spatial zones inside of that, right? It's not more than what I need. It's just enough to kind of get me by to organize this information. I don't have multiple lines going in between here and what have you. It could be more robust, but there's no need for that essentially. So let's look at starting something like this on our own. And the first thing we want to do as we're getting into InDesign is just, again, go over some of these sort of basics as we're starting this out. So the first thing we want to do is come up to a new document under File, whether you have something open or whether you just open InDesign. You want to open a new document within that space. And this is where we're going to determine the size of this document. And this is where we're going to place in the 11 by 17 tabloid size. So in the units area over here, this is going to specify how you want to make your measurements. In this case, we want to use inches. And I've already typed this in here, but you may need to enter 17 by 11. And depending on where you put these is going to change the orientation, right? If I have a width of 17, it's going to be a landscape, where if I have a height of 17, that's going to be my portrait. So it's up to you which format you want to use. We looked at format of portrait briefly last week, so let's do the landscape today. But as long as you have 11 by 17 inside there in inches, you should be good. The next thing we want to look at is our facing pages. We do not need facing pages in this document because this is not going to be like a spread in a magazine. These are individual pages. And for the time being, we only need one of them. So we'll leave that unchecked since we do not need that at this time. Moving down to our columns and our margins and what have you. I would say just leave this as the default for right now. We'll create our own guides inside the space. If you did want to change your margins, you certainly could. If you want, those are going to be the areas outside of your document, which contains all of your information, right? In this case, I have 0.5 margins all the way around. Everything is sitting inside those margins. We'll go ahead and just leave that for now. You guys can do the same. So essentially, I'll just leave all these as the default. All I've really done is change the size and my facing pages. And I can go ahead and title this too. 159. I think I may already have that, so I'm just going to test. So we're ready to go. We're ready to create this document. Let's go ahead and click create. And now we are going to enter into our workspace here. So just like we've done in the past, let's go up to Windows first off and make sure that we're all working on the same workspace. We should be working under the Essentials workspace, but you may need to reset that workspace if you've made any changes to it. So again, Window, Workspace, and working under our Essentials workspace. And again, we're getting more familiar with this. We have our tools over here on the left. We have our different, a few of our different panels that are open over here on the right. We have our properties panel or window. We have our pages window. We also have our CC libraries, which is your Creative Cloud library if you wanted to store information. But beyond that, we also want to talk about some, whoops, hold up. We also want to talk about additional windows that we're going to want to use for this project. So anytime you're working with a particular tool and you want to potentially open up all the options that are available to that tool or a different panel, those are going to be under your window up here at the very top. And the windows are going to be access to different controls within your InDesign space. So for this particular project, what we want to do is open up our character window. We have access to that within our properties palette as well, but because we're going to be using it so much throughout our content, it's easier to open up that window to have ready to use, okay? So again, going up to window, going to type and tables, you'll see character. And in addition to character, let's also open up our paragraph. So both of these are found under window, types and table, and paragraph. So these are two new windows that we've opened up that are related entirely to your characters that you're using, the typefaces, as well as the paragraph structure itself. And it just opens additional options for you. If your window does not look like this and you do not see all these options, you can click on this top little right hand, this little sort of hamburger panel here, and you should be able to see show options instead of hide options. So if yours looks like something like that, you can go to show options. Same thing for this one here. If you do not see all the tools, click into the show options and that will open those up. And now that we have those, I can actually take this and if I bring it over to the bottom one here, you'll see that it highlights this and lets me stack those on top of each other. I can just bring those over to the side of my panel to work with. So that's one of the first steps we want to do. Get open our character palette and get open, or excuse me, our character panel and open up our paragraph panel so that we have all those options ready to access as we start to work, okay? The other two things I wanted to go over before we got too far was the different viewing modes within our document. Not only do we have different viewing modes, but we also have ways to show some hidden characters. So you'll notice if I go back to my previous working file here, when I'm working on my file, I want to be able to see my grids. I want to be able to see my guides, as well as any other editing or text formatting tools that I may need to be able to see, right? So if you come up to view and screen mode, there's actually different ways of looking at your document. Normal view is going to be a normal editing view. I can see my guides, I can see my text boxes, I can see all the the necessary editing elements I need. When I go to preview, this is going to give me the option to preview my document as it will be seen once it's printed, okay? My guides are no longer there. I don't have any text boxes. It's essentially what my finished piece is going to look like. And there are other views as well, such as bleed, where if you had a bleed on your document that was going out, you can view that. But for right now, what we really want to focus on is the normal and the preview mode, because you want to be able to toggle back and forth between those to see when you're working on your document and also to see how it's going to look when it's finished. So again, that can be used at view up here and screen mode. And you can actually access that down here at the bottom left of your toolbar is your option to, if you click and hold on your little window, you can go back to normal view or preview right from here. And when we're editing, we want to be in normal view, okay? Because again, that lets us see our guides. The other thing that we want to do before we get started is we want to show our hidden characters in our type. So what does that exactly mean? Well, you'll notice that when I come over here to some of my text that I have formatted, I have these little blue icons inside there. You guys see those in there? This is little blue sort of icons, right? Now, if I go to, again, preview mode, those disappear. But what that is allowing me to do is when I'm in normal mode, when I'm in editing mode, it allows me to see what's going on with my text, the hidden characters that are in my text. And it allows me to format this text easier. So in order to make those visible, you want to come up to your type option here at the top, and you want to go to show hidden characters. You'll notice if I click hidden, those go away, but I want to show my hidden characters under my type window there. And again, when I do that, these pop up here. And what these are different icons to let me know what sort of structure I have going on. So all these dots let me know that there's a space between these words. This paragraph icon lets me know that this is a hard paragraph return, another hard paragraph return below. And you'll notice that I again have more of these dots, a space between each one of the words. And then the paragraph ends down here with my hashtag, essentially. If I have a hyphen in the space, it will give me this little sort of wave icon there, which lets me know that there's a hyphen. And there's additional icons as well. But for now, the important ones to pay attention to are these. So why would we need those? Well, I want to make sure that this is consistent. I don't want two spaces by accident in some of my titling, and that would make it easier for me to see that if I did have that. So one gives you a way to check. Two, it can be helpful in the future as we get into character styles and paragraph styles to be able to change the formatting of this if you've done this properly. So you should be working with your hidden characters shown as you're working through your text, essentially. And again, that is under your type, show hidden characters, and that way we can see this as we're editing. All right, you guys still with me so far? Excellent, excellent. Any questions? Okay. Well, let's do that on this document here. Since I haven't done it over here, let's come up to type and go to show hidden characters. Even though I don't have any text on here, I want to make that visible. And let's get started setting this up. So in our blank document, the first thing we want to do is start to lay out some guides for ourselves. Okay. Now, there's different ways that you can do this. If you go into layout, you can go into margins and columns, and this will allow you to change your margins within the piece. You'll notice if I increase my margin at the top, it gets larger. And also it will allow you to put columns into your document, right? But it doesn't allow you to put rows inside here. There's only columns. So another way to access this, and I think the better way, is to go to layout and create guides. So under layout and create guides, this allows you to create not only columns. So because I have the preview toggled on, as I increase the number of columns, it will show me that in real time. But it also allows me to put different rows inside here, right? So what I decided to do for this one was to use 5 different rows and 5 different columns and essentially create, again, a modular grid here so that we can utilize some of these spatial zones. So once I've determined that that's what I like it as, and you could use more, you could use less, you can use a modular grid if you would like for this. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And we'll see that now I have these guides to be able to start to base some of my information on. Obviously, I don't need to just use one module. In fact, I'm going to span 2 different modules for each one of my text boxes here. Okay, just like I did in my previous one here. I'm spanning 2 different modules here to create more of a spatial zone. So first thing I want to do is let's go ahead and come in here and create a text box. Just our first text box that's going to house some of our information. There's multiple ways you could do this. If you were doing something where you're using only 2 columns, you could create one single text box and format that text within that single text box if you wanted to. You can also create multiple text boxes, and you can what we call tether those text boxes, which I'll show you guys here in a second. It's essentially connecting one text box to another so that that text will then flow into the next text box. Or you can create them individually, okay? The main thing to think about is making sure that when you go into your text tool here and you're creating your text box, that you are sticking to the grids that you have created. So I'm going to use my type tool and I'm going to click and drag through. This is one of my modules here. I'm going to click and drag through into my second module so that I create this spatial zone of 2 different modules together. And now I'm going to actually go back over to my article and I'm going to copy some of my content. So La Jolla Shores Beach. I'll go ahead and just paste that. Copied, and I'm just going to come in here and paste, and Command V is the shortcut for that. Come to my article, select all of that. I'm going to go to Command C, or you can also go to Edit Copy in your browser, depending on where you're pulling your information from. And I'm going to go ahead and use my return key here to make a new paragraph. And again, Command V to place that information there. Okay. Now, all I've done is just place this information. There's literally no hierarchy going on here. So it's going to be my job now to go through and determine some of that hierarchy. So this is going to be one of my body areas here. Let's go ahead and put our title up at the top as well, just to kind of get an idea of how our hierarchy is going to flow. So maybe up here, I want to span multiple modules because I want this to be a long title for my piece. Okay, so I'll just run this across the whole sort of space up here at the top. I don't necessarily need to go all the way to the bottom because it's only going to be one line of text. So maybe I'll keep it somewhere around here. Come back over to my document. Let me grab my title, Top 10 Beaches in California. Whoops. And of course, you can retype this if you need to, but if you're able to, I would suggest copying and pasting so you don't have any errors within your piece. Come back over here and paste that there as well. All right. So at this point, I've created guides within my space. I've created 2 text boxes, and I've just literally copied and pasted up in this text box the title of my overall list, as well as the one of the topics that I'm covering and my body text that I'm going to have here. All right. So let's go in and select a typeface that we're using. Now, we could go in and this is going to be a chance for you to sort of explore a little bit. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to go with the one. I realize that this is not one of the ones in your option, but you could certainly use this one as well. It's the same one that I used last week, this rock grotesque. The reason I like this is because it has a lot of options within the typeface. And if I cruise back to my Adobe fonts, you can see that one up here as well. If you actually search rock grotesque. Yeah, they're more than welcome to use this one as well. Remember, I downloaded this on Monday. Essentially, I just activated this font within the, I activated several families within the font. They gave me access to these. And again, we saw this had 45 variations, right? Even up here at the top, we can see all these different variations and how we can use those. So you guys are more than welcome to use this typeface. I think this would be a fantastic typeface for this assignment. Don't feel like you can't just because we're using it here. Let's stick with what we have there, that rock grotesque. So I'll come back, come back to this working document. And I'm just gonna select all of my text up here in my title using my type tool itself and double clicking, triple clicking actually into the space or dragging to select it. And I'm gonna come up to my character palette. Now this is kind of repeated here, depending on how you wanna work on this, but I prefer to have this open. I'm gonna enter into my character, ROC, GR, it should go ahead and pop up. And I'll go ahead and choose what I want for my title. For right now, let's go ahead and put this as heavy. And let's increase the size because the title is going to be one of the largest things I want on here. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the point size here. I'm literally just clicking up, and I realize I'm jumping back and forth here. I apologize. Let me stick to one of these. I'm clicking up on my point size, which is the first window here underneath my character palette. This is right now 27 point. If I continue to click up, it's going to get larger and larger until I reach what I want. Okay. Now you'll notice if I zoom out, I don't want that to bleed off of the page. So let's find a happy medium somewhere in there. Okay. And actually what I did in my other one was I took top 10 and left that as a bold, and I took beaches in California, and I made this a different variation of this typeface. I believe I made it some sort of condensed. So we could certainly do that here as well. I could also go ahead and make these capital letter forms if I wanted to, because this is going to be my titling. So if I come over here, you'll see these capital T's. That will go ahead and make that capital, or you can retype that out as capitals as well. And the last thing I'm going to go do here, and just to set this off, is adjust my tracking. So all that information is found under my character. I have my point size, I have my leading, which we'll take a look at here when we get in the body copy. I have my tracking down here. So if I increase my tracking, again, that's going to increase the spacing between those letters in that space. And that creates a nice sort of break for my actual title up here. And Helika, I see that you are asking about the bleed there. So essentially a bleed would be if you were going to be printing out your document. Actually, this is an example of it right here. If I was going to be printing out this document, right? Let's say I made this top 10 list and I'm ready to send this off to the printers. You see how I have this gray box up here at the very top? Well, currently this gray box is just going to the edge of my page, right? So if I was printing this out and then trimming this and cutting it, there's the potential that that gray box might not go all the way off to the edge of the page because of either a printer faultiness, or maybe it got faulty while it was being cut slightly. So to prevent that from happening, when you are sending something to print and not using it in a digital realm, you want your elements to actually go beyond what those printing marks are going to be. You want them to go slightly outside of your the edge of your paper. Okay. So when you do that, that's what you call creating a bleed. And it actually creates a bleed on the outside of your document, right? We have to go, well, I won't distract it right now, but essentially it would create an additional line on the outside of your document. And that would be a bleed where any content that goes outside or bleeds off the composition would actually go a little further than it's intended to accommodate for any of those mistakes, either in the printing process or in the cutting process. So if they were to go ahead and print this now and then trim that paper, there's no chance that there would be any sort of white sliver of paper there because that color would bleed all the way off of the composition. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. And we will dive into that further too, guys. We're going to go over some printing techniques and things like that further in the class. But that's a good question. Any of those kind of questions that you guys have, I'm more than happy to clarify. So any questions on this here? I know there was a few edits we did with the text, and you don't have to get that complicated with it, but essentially what I want you guys to see is the way that we are changed the typeface here and adjusted this slightly, right? Created a larger size created bigger tracking in part of this. Of course, you could make it all one particular typeface if you wanted to, but the title is a place to get a little bit of interest in there as well. So now that we have that sort of set up, and we may come back to it a little bit, but we do have something going there. Let's come back to our body copy here. So this is where we're going to come into a little bit of our hierarchy further, right? So the first thing I want to do here is go ahead and change the typeface that I have for this to the typeface that I'm going to be referencing. Again, that rock grotesque. So I can click on this text box with my black arrow, or I can use my type tool to select all the text inside there. Doesn't really matter since I'm changing it all together. As long as I have that selected, I should be able to come over and select the typeface again that I want. And for this one, let's just go with our basic, not compressed and not bold. We want to go with our basic, where is it? Oh, here we go. Medium weight. This is essentially the standard weight for this typeface, right? You might even want to go, excuse me, we're going to go with our regular. So there's a lot of options inside here, but we're going to go with our regular. That's sort of like the standard for this. And the reason we're doing that is because that's what's potentially going to work the best for our body copy. And when I'm working with something like this, I like to kind of set that for my body copy and then start to work the additional hierarchy elements off of that, because I have a sort of jumping off point. Essentially, I have my two levels here to some degree. I have my top level, my title, and I'm getting close to being at my bottom level here. And then I can start to work in the middle there a little bit as well. So I have this set at rock grotesque. It's a regular typeface. Currently, this is set to a 12-point font. I can see that my leading is 14.4. That's going to be the automatic leading for this. So that's the default. The tracking is going to be set at 0. That's again going to be the default, the tracking for that, which is fine. And I have my paragraph, which is aligned to the left here as well. Okay. So a couple different things I could do here. First thing I want to do is I want to start to separate this a little bit, because the La Jolla Shores Beach is actually going to become my subheader, and the rest of this is going to be my body copy. So I'm going to use my text tool and just again hit the return key right here to create a hard return, so that I have that separation, that clear separation there. Now, I'm actually going to select my body copy, all of that body copy, by using the text tool and clicking and dragging through all of that body copy, making sure that I select all of it. And I'm going to decrease the size of this slightly to 11. And we'll see if that's going to get us there with this. I think you'll notice that when I did that, the leading changed. The new default for this, or the automatic leading, is 13.2. I wouldn't go any smaller than that. You could go a little bit larger than that if you wanted to, but be cautious of how much space you're going to have for the rest of your content as well, since we're only working with one of these right now. So for the default, let's just stick with auto, just to keep it simple. And the last thing that I want to do is I'm actually going to change my paragraph structure. Instead of being aligned to the left, I'm going to use a justified alignment. So right now, with my alignment being to the left, I have all of my text aligned to the left-hand side, and the right-hand side is what we call a ragged right, meaning it is not justified. It is just the length of that line. However far those words go out, that's how long it appears. And this doesn't look bad. This is definitely a clean way to format this. But just to change it up a little bit, I'm going to use the justify option down here. And again, that's found underneath my paragraphs, either one of these. These are going to be my align left, my center alignment, my align right, and then my justified alignments as well. And really the only difference between these is the bottom sentence, whether it's aligning it to the left, center, or justified fully. So let's go with this justify, with the last line being aligned to the left. And let's see how that works for our body. That may potentially work for our body copy there. So now moving up to our subheader, I'm going to select what I have for my subheader, and let's see what sort of changes we can do here. Now, what I would like to do is I'd like to make this a little bit larger, because I want this to stand out. And I also want to potentially make this bolder somehow, right? By using a bold option of this. But what I need to be conscious of is how much length each one of my titles is. Again, I'm only working with one of these, and I might have in my reference a title that's much longer than this. So I'm actually going to, for this one, going to use a condensed version of the typeface. So let's try the condensed extra bold. Let's go with condensed bold. I think that will work well. And again, I'm going to extend the tracking here slightly. So I'm going to kick out those letter forms just a little bit from one another that are there. And if you wanted to make those all capitals, you could do that. That's underneath the paragraph options here. Whether you want to make them all capitals, you can automatically do that without having to retype that just by clicking on the all caps. And that's starting to get some sort of hierarchy there. Now, one thing I had in my other one was I had a numeral, which is not on the website, but you could certainly include that. I'm going to go ahead and add that in here. And again, let's change this up slightly too, just to create a little difference. So let's go with extra wide bold, maybe. Get a little different look and feel. Okay. So we're starting to get there. Could certainly push this further if we wanted to. But what I would suggest is getting somewhere with this and then starting to work through some of the additional components of the content and see what sort of changes you're going to need to make. Because what you might realize is, oh, wow, I really have a long title in one of these pieces. I'm going to need to adjust that. Or one of these topics has a really a longer description than the other one. So I might need to adjust the length of those lines or the typefaces. So our work isn't necessarily done, but we do have something that we can base some of these other pieces off of here. Okay. Are there any questions right now on those 3 different levels? I mean, essentially, I guess it's 4 different levels because we're kind of playing with the numeral here as well. But any questions with that? How we're editing those or working them into the structure here a little bit? Is that making sense? Are you guys able to, if not follow along in InDesign, kind of know what I'm follow along with what I'm doing? Okay. Well, we got a couple other things we could do here. Before we continue this too much further, we could certainly add a little bit of grayscale in here. Maybe we don't want everything to just be black and white. So let's do that. I think, the numeral here is getting a little bit larger. In fact, I could even potentially increase the size of that slightly if I wanted to. And I'm going to take that back. Let's leave that the way that it is. But what I do want to do is let's go ahead and just select the numeral that we have here. And in my appearance, there's 2 ways I could do this. I could come over to my properties palette, come over to the appearance of that text. And within the fill, I could change the tint. Right now it's set to black. I could change the tint of this either on the slider by controlling that on the slider, or I could type in a numeral. Let's go with 60 here, what that looks like. So that will give me just a slightly different, color of that there if I wanted to do that. We might even want to do that with a portion of the top here as well. In fact, let's do this. Let's select this again. Let's make our white more like a 40% range. And let's make our body copy just for the heck of it. Select that and make that a 80% range. So let's see how this looks. Okay, so I have a numeral that is slightly larger, but it's a little bit of a less opacity. So it kind of plays with that balance within the title here. The title is obviously standing out because it's the darkest thing. It's also capitalized and it's in a little bolder text. So all those things are working in my favor there. As I get into the actual body copy, I drop that down to 80% black. So it's still very legible, still very, enough contrast against the white of the background, but does kind of harmonize, maybe not make it feel so stark on the page there either. So that's just something that we could certainly explore within the hierarchy. There's no right or wrong there necessarily, but you can definitely play around with how you want that to be seen. So from here, let's go ahead and continue this process. I'm going to go back. I'm in preview mode right now. I'm going to go back to normal mode, the bottom left-hand corner. And because I have an individual text box, I can actually just copy this entire text box over and replace this with the new information. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select my text box that I have with my black arrow tool. I can go to edit, copy, edit, paste and place if I'd like to. And now there's actually two of these. And if I move this over to the right, it should line up perfectly with my grid because I have a modular grid here. And essentially I could just use this to change out my information, right? So I could repeat that by going to edit, copy and paste and place again. The other way I can do that is just by holding the Option or the Alt key on my keyboard once I have that object selected. This works in Illustrator as well. It allows you to duplicate that object. So again, just by holding the Option or Alt key on a PC, I can duplicate that box, bring it over, and I'm just simply aligning that with the grid that I've already constructed. So whether you want to copy or paste that or duplicate it, however you want to do that, I'm essentially just copying this text box, placing it in the grid. And now I'm going to go through and start to put my additional numbers in here. So let's cruise back to the website and check out my second beach. So Santa Monica Beach, I'm going to copy this, jump back to my content, select just my title. And this is where those special characters can be helpful to see what you have selected. I'm going to go ahead and go to edit and paste. I'm going to change my numeral here to 2. Shoot back over to my article, grab that text that's going to be in my body copy, Command C or edit copy, come back to my document, go ahead and select all of that text that's in my text box itself. And again, edit and paste. And this lets me know I have an extra paragraph break here. You see that? So I can actually hit the return key and come up 2 spaces to bring that up, just be formatted correctly. But essentially I have my number 2 mark in here and that looks good. I mean, fortunately on this one, the content was a little bit smaller, actually. I don't have any widows on here yet, which would be a word by itself. So I'm looking good there. So I would go ahead and continue on with the process. Go ahead and grab Coronado Beach. And I kind of think you guys get where I'm going here with this, right? Selecting my subheader again, being careful to select only the areas that I need to select. Command V, I'll change this to my Roman numeral 3. Jump back to my website, grab the description for that specific topic, copy it, and paste it into the box here. And what's happening is, since I've already formatted this text in this box, I'm literally just replacing the content. Because I'm only selecting the things that I've already formatted, it's giving the same format to those things that I'm then placing into those boxes, okay? So I won't go through all of those, but I think you guys get the idea of how we can set up potentially one of these boxes. And from there, you could duplicate that and use that for the rest of them. And once I had all of these filled out, I could essentially use my black arrow tool to select not only one of these boxes, but all of them at the same time, and then duplicate them down or copy and paste them below. So I could do that either by holding the Shift key and selecting multiple boxes at the same time, and then going to edit, copy, edit, paste in place, and literally dragging all these down. I'm going to hold my Shift key to keep them from moving around, and they should line up perfectly with my grid. So again, I would use this content box to go in, replace that information, but essentially my hierarchy is there, right? It's just a matter of replacing that information at this point. And you may run into an anomaly, right? Let's say that one of these titles is really long. Let's say it's Santa Monica State Beach of California, right? And it's like, well, dang it, I was doing such a good job here, and now one of my titles is throwing this whole thing off. It's not to say that you can't have something that would go break to 2 lines. That's fine. It's not to say that you couldn't do that, but if you only have one element that's going on there, maybe there's a way to potentially change that, right? So this might be where you say, all right, I'm actually going to select my title here, and I want to, I'm going to adjust this to try to get this onto 1 line. So potentially you could bring in your tracking slightly. So if I adjust my tracking back to 0, I could do that. Maybe I even want to adjust my size slightly if I needed to do that, right? Let's say that this was the conclusion that I came to, and you said, you know what, I think this is going to be the better solution for that, whatever it may be, right? I don't actually think that would be the case, but let's just assume that. Well, you've made a change here to this text, but all these other ones are now different, right? So one way that you could change that is you can use your eyedropper tool. And your eyedropper tool is essentially a way to select something and then apply the attributes that you have to that to something else, okay? So I'm actually gonna, let's change this example. I'm gonna do something a little different. Instead of doing that, let's change this to a different, let's change the numerals here to a different typeface. Yeah, that's gonna be a better example. Let's go to extra wide heavy. Let's say, you know what? I realized after doing this, I'm gonna change up my numerals, but again, I want to adjust that throughout. So what you can do here, and this works for anything, any sort of text that you have here, is you can use your eyedropper to select on that object that has that certain properties to it. By clicking on it, it's going to load up that eyedropper. You notice how the eyedropper shifted from being empty to being kind of half full and tilting to the other side. And now when you hover over other areas of text, if I zoom in a little bit and I double click, it will give the property to that text. If I wanted to do it to my dot here as well, I would do it to my dot. And essentially I would just move through my document and apply that towards the different areas of text that I need to. So that eyedropper tool can be really handy to make kind of universal changes this way. And again, it's just essentially been loaded up with certain attributes. As soon as I double click on a different text, it will apply wherever that is. Again, if I go back to my selection tool here and use my eyedropper to select, say, my body copy, whoops, all right, sorry. And then I come up here and click on this subheader, for example, it will apply that body copy attributes to whatever it is that I click on. So that eyedropper tool can be really helpful to save you if you do make changes throughout your document there, to be able to copy and paste attributes of certain things. And we're only dealing with typography right now, but that also works for colors and things like that as well, any of the attributes that it has. There's 2 other things, or at least one other thing that I want to cover, but are there any questions right now about the formatting? I think that's kind of the bulk of it at this point. Okay, I want to propose one other thing here. Let's say that you had connected columns, right? Let's say that we were actually doing this a little bit differently. And instead of having this be modular, you were just going to have individual columns here, okay? So I'm going to actually take all of my text boxes here, and I'm going to bring those all the way down. And I'm just selecting all of them at the same time and stretching them down. So now one single text box that I have is actually running through all 4 of my modules, right? And to the very bottom of my page. Now, let's say that you wanted to have that connected. So you're essentially creating a list that moves downwards and it flows to the next column and then flows to the next column, so on and so forth. Well, there is a way that we can do that. And let me, in order to do that successfully, let me just fill a couple of these in here. So let me erase the current text that's in these. And I realize we're at 2 right now, guys. So we're going to get out of here in just a second. Just want to show you this last thing. All right, so let's redo our structure here. So we have 5 columns still, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're a lot longer vertical columns. And instead of it being modular, we're just going to lay these out for the length, depending on the length of the actual topic itself, right? But we don't want them to be disconnected. Right now, this column is disconnected from this column, so on and so forth. And there's a couple things to look at here. Right now, when I select this column on the left, you'll notice that there's this little box down here that has become red. And if I select the column next to it, you'll notice that it's clear. But in this case over here, there's this red plus sign in this box. And what that's letting me know is that the content, the text that you have in that text box is more than what we're seeing. It's actually going beyond the text box, okay? So I could either, obviously copy and place that into the next column, but you can also what we call tether these columns together. And in order to do that, all you need to do is just click on that little red box. You'll notice as soon as I click on it, it sort of loads up my mouse and it's letting me know, hey, where do you want to tether this to? So I'm just going to connect it to the next column over. And now when I make a change in this column, let's say I put an additional space in here, you'll see it reflected in the other column as well, right? So I'm going to kind of create more of these so we can see how this is being used. So essentially, if you had a running list of these, you could tether all of these columns together. I could take this text box here, tether it to this one, take this one, tether it to this one, tether it to this one. And again, all I'm doing is I'm clicking on that little overflow button, whether it's actually overflowing or not, and loading up my mouse and clicking the cursor on a different opposing column. It happens to be right next to it, but it just really depends on wherever you click. So now I have this running sort of text throughout my space, right? Which could also be fine for a layout. I just want to make sure it's consistent. So this is where those hidden characters come into play. If I'm using 2 spaces between each one of these, I'd want to make sure that I'm using 2 spaces consecutively, right? So making any of those changes throughout, that's going to affect these. This also brings up the case of any orphans, which again would be a line that is by itself. Let's say this text box, just for the sake of argument, was something like this, right? And you have one single line of text that's at the top of this column that's related back to this previous body of text. That's called an orphan, and you want to try to get rid of those. So one way to do that would either be to just break this one a little bit shorter. So maybe find a spot where you could break this and return that so that it goes all the way to the top of the next column if you needed to. Or if you have room, you could bring that previous sentence over through text accommodations. But one way or another, you want to kind of try to avoid those. But essentially, this would be where you would go through and say, okay, I do need to add an extra paragraph here so that numeral comes up to the top. That's maybe getting a little tight there. So maybe I want to bring the rest of this sentence up here. So I have a little bit, doesn't become an orphan. I'm going to add in my additional space there. And something like this could potentially work too. It's spanning these different columns, right? Not necessarily using a modular grid, but using more of a column-based grid. But nonetheless, we're still able to see a clear separation between each one of these topics. You could definitely play with the positioning of your title. In the other one, I brought in a graphic element of a gray square up at the top with some minor lines inside there and stuff. You could certainly add in some of those graphic elements if you see fit, but don't get bogged down by those either. The main thing here is really looking at the hierarchy of the structure that we're dealing with. So there's a few different ways to approach these. I know that that's kind of a lot, and you guys may use some of that. You may use all of it, depending on what it is that you're doing. But I hope that you guys can find this helpful and kind of get you guys started, putting you in the right direction. Okay. Do you guys have any questions at this point? Okay, I take it you guys are feeling pretty comfortable then with this. Hopefully you maybe even started doing a couple of these on your own. Remember to show those hidden characters, use those guides. If the typeface that you're selecting is not working, then change it out. Don't be afraid to go back, change that. You can use that eyedropper tool to make those sort of universal changes throughout. And the last thing is make sure to save this out. When you're saving this, make sure to export this as a PDF. I won't go over that whole thing again. We did it on Monday. If anybody's having issues, please let me know. But remember, when we're working in InDesign, we want to save this out as an Adobe PDF. We can use smallest file size for this one and save this out with the appropriate name. That would be what will be submitted for this week.